Give us a great chance to celebrate our community's legacy and our rich heritage. So my name's Dawn. I'm a member of Vancouver Urban's Forestry Commission. We are a 7-member citizen body appointed by the City Council to advise on tree-related issues. Commissioners will be helping with the festival throughout the day, and we'd like to thank them: Susan Sanders, Kelly Bolin, Ben Joner, Gayla Shanahan, Susan Law, Melissa Johnston, and former Commissioner Craig Smith. Thank you guys very much for helping and being here. We'll appreciate seeing your smiling faces today. And we are excited to see the rest of you come out as well. And welcome fall. Here it is. We want to thank the partners of today's event, which is Collier Tree Experts and Arborscape Tree Scare and Slow Food, Southwest Washington. And we cannot do this alone. Our partners, sponsors, and volunteers help us achieve this mission every year. The support we have throughout the community shows that Vancouver is truly a community that cares about trees. So we have a lot of activities today. We have live music, we have arts and crafts for children, a tour of the land bridge, tree care workshops, apple cider pressing, and of course, tasty food. New this year is a hard cider garden. That sounds fun. Presented by Slow Food, Southwest Washington. So please check out the schedule of events so you don't miss anything. Also, we are handing out cuttings from the old apple tree, and you'll find the urban forestry booth right by Our Lady. So remember, it's first come, first serve, and there are limited, but please go and spread her around a little more. We want to see more of her around town. So, we're going to get started with all of our activities, and to start, we have Bob Cromwell with us with the National Park Service, and he tells a great history perspective of the old apple tree. Please welcome Bob and enjoy the story.
Thank you, Dawn, and good morning. So, I always like to begin this off. I believe this is the 7th year that I've actually participated in the Old Apple Tree Festival. And I always like to begin things off by wishing the Old Apple Tree a happy birthday. Let's give the Old Apple Tree a round of applause for its 191st year of being here. 191, I think the tree looks fantastic and certainly better than any of us will look when we turn 191. So the story of the old apple tree is kind of wrapped in a bit of enigma. We don't have a true history on how it ended up where it is at. There are wonderful stories from the Hudson's Bay Company period about the first apple trees that came here to Fort Vancouver. Fort Vancouver, if you're not aware, this is the colonial capital of the Pacific Northwest. It's really the first place Euro-American civilization took root and flourished. And it was run by the Hudson's Bay Company, which was a British fur trade firm. They brought almost every industrial first we can think of that we associate with the Pacific Northwest. And of course, our apple industry, Washington is now famous for its apples. And of course, apples were first brought here to Fort Vancouver in 1826. And the story is a ship captain came here from Great Britain. Some record it was Amelia Simpson, who was actually the nephew of the governor of the Hudson's Bay Company, George Simpson. He had attended a party back in London in 1825 and then took his 9-month voyage to get here. When he was at the party in London, a young lady actually cut an apple and took the seeds from the apple, wrapped it in a handkerchief, and handed it to him and told him to bring the seeds to the new land in order to prosper apples on the other side of the world. He was wearing a vest to that party, and when he arrived here, he was actually welcomed to go to dinner at the chief factor's house at Fort Vancouver. While sitting at the dinner table with Chief Factor John McLaughlin, he realized he was wearing the same vest he had been wearing in London, reached into the pocket and found the handkerchief with the apple seeds. And he presented those apple seeds to the chief factor. And the chief factor thanked him profusely for that. And apparently it was 5 or 6 seeds. And those seeds were given to the Hudson's Bay Company gardener by the name of William Bruce. And William Bruce tendered to those seeds, planted them in pots, kept them under glass, and actually made sure they grew into saplings. And from those first 5 or 6 saplings, the first orchard was actually established here at Fort Vancouver. If you walk over the land bridge, go towards Fort Vancouver, you will go through a replica orchard, which actually is planted in the same location as the original orchard that the Hudson's Bay Company planted. By the 1840s, the Hudson's Bay Company had over 500 apple trees in this location. That apple orchard was planted 10 years ago now, and it's a very unique orchard in North American continent, because basically most apple trees today are actually grafted trees. They're the result of two trees having grown and basically one being chopped down and a new tree grafted into the other. That's how they control for varietals. In the past, apple trees were planted from seed and then basically allowed to grow. And we actually planted our apple orchard from seed. So it's a very unique apple orchard to this day. So the old apple tree has certainly seen an awful lot of change in this location in its over 190 years of existence. Where we're at 190 years ago was the midst of really the first neighborhood as we understand neighborhoods today in the Portland, Vancouver metro area. This was part of the Hudson's Bay Company servant village. The Hudson's Bay Company had a caste system. Basically, if you watch the OPB special or the PBS special, Downton Abbey, over the last few years, you got basically a view of the end of the landed gentry period in Great Britain, where you had gentleman class and servant class. The Hudson's Bay Company replicated that class system here. And at Fort Vancouver, the class systems were divided by inside the fort versus outside the fort. You had the gentlemen living inside and the servants living outside. This was the servant village. At its peak in 1845, there were 50 to 60 buildings and 600 to 1,000 people actually residing in this village, which does not sound a lot today, but in 1845, this was actually the biggest Euro-American settlement between San Francisco and Sitka, Alaska. So, the old apple tree was planted in the yard of a house which we now know as the John Johnson House. John Johnson, we know, was a cooper who worked for the Hudson's Bay Company. He actually made barrels. In 1980 to 84, Washington DOT realigned SR 14 and Interstate 5. And in fact, Columbia Highway originally was in the alignment where we're now sitting and standing. And in fact, there used to be a pull-off to actually stop and visit the old apple tree off of the old Columbia Highway. But in 1980 to 84, the decision was made to move the highway to the north, and lots of archaeology occurred in this corridor. And basically, about 30 feet due north of the old apple tree was the remnants of the John Johnson House, right in the middle of SR 14. And that was completely excavated by Washington DOT archaeologists in the 1980s. And that collection now resides with the National Park Service. So there's evidence that the old apple tree was planted in the yard of the John Johnson House and was likely tended by the residents of that house. We know that John Johnson was married to an Umpqua Indian. Her name was Marie Umpqua. They had several children, and they resided in the house for over 20 years. What is not really known is how John Johnson ended up with this old apple tree. Because if you believe the stories of Captain Simpson dropping the seeds off to John McLaughlin had those seeds guarded, and they would have been planted adjacent to the fort. In 1911, the regional horticulturalist actually for this area encountered the old apple tree in what was then the midst of the Vancouver Barracks. This was the U.S. Army Post Vancouver Barracks. The Hudson's Bay Company left in 1860, and between 1860 and 1911, the U.S. Army did everything they could to remove anything dealing with the Hudson's Bay Company. The village was removed by 1860, the fort was burned in 1866, and what is amazing is this lowly apple tree just continued surviving. There was a road that went from the barracks down to the wharf. There was a wharf on the Columbia, and basically where Husong and Larry's restaurant is now was the old U.S. Army wharf. And that road actually went north-south towards the Columbia, and if you look on the other side of the rail berm, you'll see a large oak tree. It's a pin oak tree planted by the U.S. Army in the 1880s along this road. And that road, the remnants of that road, are on the other side of SR 14 in Park Service property, and there are old historic chestnut and pin oak trees still marking that road as well. And my surprise is that the railroad has never taken that 1880s Army oak tree down, even though it's right up against their berm. So the tree has survived an awful lot. It literally had a highway jump over it. The railroad was built right next to it. And of course, an overpass was built right next to it. It has been literally at a crossroads of time here and marking various roads, many of which are now non-extant. And somehow it has survived it all. If you look at the tree carefully, it is hollow. There's actually a 1950s truck axle grown into the middle of it. Somebody placed it there in order to prop it up, probably in the 1960s, and yet it still survives. It still bears fruit, and in many ways, its own robustness is now its own worst enemy because it keeps putting up so much new growth, it's challenging its own hollow trunk. So actually working with the city is working with local arborists who really keep that tree as low as possible to keep the weight off of it. If you ever wonder why it kind of looks so stumpy, it's actually purposeful. We're trying to keep the weight off of it so that that trunk will survive as many more seasons as possible. So with that, there are a lot of facts, actually related to the old apple tree that I can't get into today, but I have written a synopsis history of the old apple tree, and it's actually on several websites. If you Google history of the old apple tree, it will pop up. I do have a paper copy. I will leave it at the Park Service booth. We're actually situated next to the old apple tree, if anybody wants to read it today. I will be here for at least the next half hour. If anybody wants to talk, I'm happy to relay any other information I can about the tree or anything else about Hudson's Bay Company or U.S. Army history. With that, I'm going to turn it back over to Don. And again, let's give the old apple tree another round of applause for 191 years. And let's hope we're here to celebrate its 200th birthday here in just about 9 years away. So thank you very much.
That was a good story. Bob does know his history on the old apple tree. Please go and visit him while you've got a chance to actually talk to the expert. But as he said, you can also Google that, just like you can about everything else, and get all the information you'd like. So again, thank you, Bob. Round of applause for you. Very nice. Okay, so we know about the old apple tree, but we also have many amazing trees in our Urban Forestry's Heritage Tree Program. So, if you know an amazing old, big, or historical tree, you can nominate it for the Heritage Tree Program as well. And you can find out more about that at the Urban Forestry Commission booth near the old apple tree. And please do take a look around and start to notice what beautiful trees there are. And if you want to save one because you know it's historic or it says some sort of special meaning for you, let's try to keep it around and let us know, let us hear about it, and we'll do that for you. This year's guided tour of the land bridge begins at noon, and we're pleased to have special guest Greg Archuleta from the Grand Ronde tribe lead a tour focusing on the native plants and the trees found on the land bridge. Wait a minute, I don't think it's trees, it's uses found on the land bridge. If you're interested, please meet at the Confluence Project's tent at the foot of the land bridge by noon. Foot of the land bridge, I must be hungry. Also at noon is the first of 2 Ask the Arborist workshops at the Collier Tree Experts booth near the old apple tree, where you can get all your tree questions answered. Now, go ahead, relax a little bit. We're gonna get ready for our first band, a River Twain, and I will introduce them once they're ready, so go check things out, and we'll be back with you shortly. Thanks.